Hey everyone, it's Jim
And Charles
from Valves and More, an online vintage tube store. And today in Tube Lab number 237, we're going to talk about preamps and preamp tubes. And before I forget, our subscribers, that's
you guys.
you guys, we rolled 8,000 subscribers last week. I couldn't believe it. I can remember years ago when I hit 100 subscribers and I was over the moon.
Yeah, and it feels like not that long ago we just rolled over 5,000 or 6,000 and 8 just kind of snuck up on us. So welcome everybody. We're happy to have you on the channel, and we hope you're all learning something and having some fun.
Yeah. But first, caution everyone, electronics and tube amplifiers can have very high voltages present, which can be lethal. Exercise extreme caution when working around them. Always consult a professional technician when in doubt. Well, to achieve great audio, a lot of things need to be at their best. Without a great effort from the musicians, studio, and mastering engineers, you really don't have anything. But we don't have any control over the actual recording, other than choosing the best we can find. But in our homes, we take over. And our choice of speakers and our room setup can make a huge difference. But after our speakers, what's next in importance with 3 question marks? I can hear everyone shouting, "The tubes!" And of course, that's true. But which tubes? And that brings us to today's topic, preamp tubes. In any system, they're the most critical stage to get right. Yes, everything matters, but some things matter more. Now, today's topic arrived as a gift from Melotone Amps, our kit amp company, which in less than 4 days developed a brand new version of our much-loved Universal 6 or 12 SN7 preamp. And if you're interested, I'll put a link below to the MTA video. And before I forget, many of you don't own preamps. Not as separates anyway, but if you own an integrated amp, and many of you do, you actually have a preamp. It's just built in, along with a power amp. To figure out which tube in an integrated amp is the preamp tube, or tubes, look for the high gain tubes. A typical integrated amp will have a mix of 12AX7 and 12AU7s, or 6SL7s and 6SN7s. The 12AX7 and the 6SL7 are the high gain tubes in that lot, and most likely are the preamp tubes. Okay, let's take a look at a bunch of excellent preamp tubes and talk a bit about each. Okay, Charles, you're up.
Okay. So the reason why we're bringing up how you have an integrated preamp and which tubes are likely the preamp tubes in there is that it's going to have the greatest effect on the sound within the amplifier itself. I mean, other than the amplifier circuit, of course. And here we have an assortment of some of the most common, most popular types of preamp tubes. And we're going to go through them one at a time. So let's start up at these little guys right here. And this is a 12AX7. Now 12AX7s are essentially 2 tubes in 1 bottle. We've got 2 sections here, and they're both very high gain. And this kind of, as soon as these were invented, they basically took over the high gain duty of almost everything that was out there. They're small, they're very compact, they're efficient, and they can do a lot of voltage amplification.
Yeah, and they have a weakness. And the weakness is they're a fairly neutral sounding tube, which can be good and it can be bad. And the wonderful thing about the world of vintage tubes is that you can roll in a different 12AX7 or choose a different amp. And this is part of what we're talking about today, is to help you choose your equipment based on the type of preamp tubes that it takes, because the sound of the 12AX7 in, let's say, a phono stage may be something that you're really just not that impressed with. You don't dislike it, but it doesn't really bring the music alive. And the very best of the vintage 12AX7s are what we carry. So the Matsushita is a really good example. I wouldn't say they're a rare tube, but they're certainly not that common. But we've been managing to keep enough in stock ahead of orders. It's probably our most popular 12AX7.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And these were made on Mullard and / Phillips tooling, and
share a little bit of share a lot of the similarities with the Mullard tube, which
absolutely. Except they share the best parts, but they don't share the higher noise floor and the microphonics that tends to come with them. And some of that is probably due to age and use, because you don't tend to find a lot of those tubes as new old stock anymore, and that haven't been selected out. So these are an excellent option if you do have something that takes 12AX7s. They're probably one of the better sounding ones.
What about your latest discovery that is basically a little lower powered 12AX7, but it's not a 12AX7, is it?
Yeah, so this is the 12R HH14. I know, weird tube name, but this is the kind of designations that you see over in Japan. This was made by NEC, but it was made on Western Electric tooling, which is one of the reasons why we were so interested in it. And these are just like a lower gain 12AX7. It has a gain probably closer to something like a 12AT7, but a plate resistance that's more like a 12AX7. So it's pretty much a drop-in replacement.
Yeah, and we've been getting reviews from early adopters, and they're stellar. In fact, one of our best customers is it fair to call her an intrepid audiophile?
I would say that.
And she has golden ears, and she's very, very particular about her sound and what she's looking for. And she's willing to put in the time and money to investigate what is the best sounding tubes. And I just got an email from her this morning saying that these NECs have actually replaced her Telefunken smooth plates, which is considered to be the ultimate 12AX7. Now, this is possibly partly equipment dependent. In fact, it's always going to be equipment dependent, and it's going to be depending on your tastes. But in our experience, most of actually everything that she has said has aligned with our own listening experience. So I would say that she's spot on 99% of the time.
Yeah.
So this is a new discovery of ours. They're very rare tubes.
Yeah, we can't get anywhere near as many of these in as we can of the Matsushitas, but they'll trickle in. We'll make up some more pairs. I think we have some pairs of these standard ones in the store right now, if you're interested in them.
Yeah, I think we've got 2 pairs left and a single.
And if you have an amplifier that has maybe a little too much gain, this is also a good way of toning it down a little bit.
Okay, now what about the earlier high gain version, which is actually still very common? Oh, sorry, you're on the 12AX7s.
Yeah. Well, let's go over to what the 12AX7s replace. And these are the 6SL7 types. So these are octal tubes. They're obviously much larger, but they're still dual triodes, so 2 sections inside 1 tube. And these have a bit of a lower gain of around 70. That's ideal. Always depends on your operating point and your amp.
Now, they're not circuit compatible with the 12AX7. They're different tubes, different gain, different plate resistance.
But in practice, these were replaced by these.
Yeah.
As equipment got smaller and they were looking for more efficiencies. But we really like the 6SL7s because they tend to have a much warmer sound. Most of them were made a lot earlier than these smaller 9-pin tubes. And we find that the earlier the tube is, generally the warmer the sound is, the more harmonics are involved in it, and the more nuance there is.
You particularly hear that in the mid-range, and given that 90% of all recorded music's in the mid-range, it's not unreasonable to say that that's really where these tubes shine. Now, show the label off on this, because this is interesting. These elevated early 6SL7s by Sylvania are great sounding tubes, but they are prone to being noisy, and much of what's left in the inventory are either mismatched or noisy, and they are rapidly going extinct. And we've got a little note on this saying SM, and on our labels, we use that to tell us that it's slightly microphonic. So,
and that means this is something that we're not going to sell.
No.
This is for our own listening experience, because we know if you tap on the amp near it, if you walk near it, if you flip a switch, it's going to do a little bit of a ring for a bit of time.
Yeah, it probably will sound amazing. And because we don't hold back any tubes from our customers, we don't have a private collection of tubes. Everything in the inventory is available to our customers, basically.
Well, unless if it's something that's like this, where you don't want to sell this to someone.
Yeah. So
this stays for us. We get the stuff that's on the edge.
now there's actually a rebased Lochtel version of that tube that's really old. It goes back to the late 1930s, very early 1940s.
The offsetting of the plates that you see here actually came a little bit later. And the earlier version actually had them back to back, just like this right here. And they had these beautiful big chrome domes on them because they also had a foil or a plate getter, but they stuck it on the top rather than on the bottom like this. Yeah. And they have a very similar sound to them.
And now we rebase them as octals. In fact, if Charles reaches on his right-hand side, he can grab a Lochtel tube. There's one right there.
This is actually a 6SN7 GTA, probably a WGTA equivalent.
Woohoo.
Right here. And this is how they look like once they've had their base pulled off.
And what do they look like before? I think there's one right there on your right. That's with the base on.
There's one with the base on.
Yeah. It's quite a task to rebase them. I think I figured out that there's
a lot of labor involved.
Yeah, and there's a lot of soldering, a lot of connections. And we have a fairly high loss rate as well because the process is quite involved. Some of them just won't release their bases.
Yeah.
I don't think there was crazy glue invented way back in 1937, but something is on there that's really sticky.
Now, even though the 12AX7 types replaced the 6SL7s over time, they did actually continue to make 6SL7s, and a lot of them were actually made for military or industrial purposes. If you imagine for a moment that you're the American military of the 60s or 70s, you probably had a lot of equipment floating around that still had these tubes in them. And you wanted to make sure that you could keep those running. So they continued to produce these all the way up into the late 60s, maybe the early 70s. It's a little...
Well, I think we've seen box dates as late as 1982 or 83, which is the last Sylvania plant that closed down in the United States was in Emporium, Pennsylvania. That was the parent plant. And it closed its doors, I believe, in 1982 or 83. At that point, Sylvania had sold to Philips, and Philips was labeling that. Is this one of the Philips label tubes? It is.
Yeah. But it's in the Sylvania Classic Green, of course.
Yeah. And later on, they actually changed it to a blue Philips label. God knows why. But anyways, it's exactly the same tube that Sylvania designed and built. They are amazing sounding tubes. If you want sort of a high gain preamp tube that's between the very warm sounding early types that we showed you a minute ago and the very neutral sounding 12AX7, this is the tube.
While also being very low noise and low microphonic.
Yeah. And and in the right circuit, these are just absolutely stunning. Significantly because the background is just so quiet. Never forget particularly with the preamp, which is a voltage gain stage, the less noise from the electrical circuit itself, from the region around your preamp, and from the tube itself, the more detail you can hear in the actual recording. So getting it right in the tube is a really good start. So yeah, so those are really quite stunning tubes. Now, what about the modern version of the 6SN7?
Okay, so that's these guys over here. So this is one of our favorite versions of the 12AU7. The 12AU7 isn't the direct successor of a 6SN7, but in practice, just like with the 12AX7 and the 6SL7, they were used for the same purpose after they were invented. So this is another dual triode. These are all dual triodes, by the way. They were just really convenient to do them that way.
Yeah, because you have two tubes instead of one tube in an envelope. And
you have enough space for all the pins on here. So these are 9 pins.
And of course, as time went on, circuits got more and more complicated. So instead of having 2 single tubes, you could have 1 tube. So that had the real estate, basically.
And lowered the power draw for the heaters.
Now, these are quite famous tubes. These are the RCA clear tops.
I wonder why they call them that.
Yeah, so they have a side getter, so that's where the gettering is.
Right
and
here.
it's not uncommon to put it on the side. GE did a lot of that. And the thing about the RCA clear tops is it has an absolutely stunning treble presentation. Probably the best treble of any preamp tube ever made, in my opinion. And that's saying a lot because we've listened to a lot of tubes. And it does everything really well. It has a very, very small touch of warmth in the mids, but like the 12AX7, it's a relatively neutral tube. So if you're looking for a preamp with a bit of warmth that'll bring the music a little bit more towards, let's say, a live sound, you want the 6SN7. You want a 6SN7 preamp. If you are a little bit more towards liking a neutral sound, something that's a little bit more solid state, but not solid state, then the 12AU7, especially the better types, would be a great choice. Now, the interesting thing about the 12AU7, even though I would call it not my favorite preamp tube, it's not a terrible tube, but the really fun thing is there were a lot of types made.
Yeah, and a lot of them under different labels. So over here we've got a Sylvania, and this is a, let me get that. That is a 5814A, and all that is just an industrial type 12AU7 that they made. The same pinout, the same specifications. It's a 12AU7 basically, and there's probably at least half a dozen different versions of the 12AU7 under different names that are out there that were made by all these different manufacturers all over the world.
I would say even more than that, but some of them aren't that common. Many of them were designed for computer duty. Stay away from those tubes. They're not.
They can be good, but
be.
they were never selected or matched to have good match sections or low noise. They were meant to be on-off triggers. So,
yeah.
So this is I would say this is a little bit more of a warmer sounding tube than the RCA, but not by a whole lot. I don't actually have a lot of experience with these guys, but maybe I'll pop it into the system later and have a listen. That's one of the good things about the 12AU7s. Just like all these other tubes, there's lots of rolling options available.
Yeah, and another little pro tip, if you're looking for a warmer sounding tube, go with the earlier ones, the earliest that you can find, that you can afford. And
that'll work in your system.
They'll work in your system. Adapting across is not normally a smart idea for a lot of reasons. Taking, let's say, an octal tube and trying to get it into a miniature 9-pin socket means the adapter is basically ungainly. It's more practical to go the other way. We didn't bring out any 6CG7s, but that is an absolutely excellent sub for
the 6SN7.
And the other thing to keep in mind is years ago when I first designed a universal kit preamp, I basically was focused on the future, because when I designed the first universal 6 or 12 SN7 preamp, there were lots of excellent 6SN7s available, but I could see that they were rapidly disappearing, and we were able to increase our inventory of 12SN7 and 12 SL7s, identical tubes, just a different filament voltage. So when I designed that kit, I made it universal, so it could take either a 6 or a 12 volt filament supply. In fact, if somebody finds, I don't know,
if there's a 32 volt one out there or something, we could run it too. Just have to swap the supply.
That's right. That's the way it was designed.
Wouldn't that be fun if somebody found something like that?
So keep that in mind if you're getting into a preamp, because there are a lot more quality vintage 12 volt tubes out there available. Now, they're rapidly going down in inventory as well, especially as people realize, hey, wait a minute, Jim and Charles have got mouse ear tung-sols?
Yeah, so...
Or Sylvania bad boys, brand new in the box. I mean, it's insane that we still have some. We don't have a lot left because people have been buying them up over the years.
Yeah.
And we're not going to be able to replace them. I got really lucky years ago. One of our wholesalers specializes in military equipment, and he ended up with a lot of extra mil-spec tubes. And it cost a lot of money even years ago to buy them in. But it was a good investment because you just don't find them anymore.
Yeah.
So, yeah, especially new old stock, new in the box. Anyways.
Well, let's take a closer look at these 6SN7s. So they are the earlier version of the 12AU7, essentially. And this is the mouse ear that we were just talking about. They have these very distinctive circular micas here that help with microphonics and spacing, I assume. And this is the 12-volt version. So you can see JAN, Joint Army Navy. CTL, I think, is Tung-sol's manufacturer code.
Yeah, for the Pentagon.
And then we have our voltage, which is 12, SN7 GT. So this is the early version. You can't run this in a modern amplifier unless if it was designed for both the filament voltage and for the actual operating point.
So if your preamp or amp takes a 6SN7 GTA or GTB, this is totally not the tube for you.
Mm-hmm. And comparatively, so a lot of these early 6SN7s had these vertical plate structures. You see that?
Yeah, elevated back-to-back T-plates was the standard construction for everybody, basically.
And some of the best sounding versions of the 6SN7 were made this way. And probably partially because they're the older versions, but also I think there's something about the design that really helps that. Here's the famous Bad Boy in a 12-volt version. And it has that beautiful big chrome on the bottom here.
And a foil getter hiding behind there.
Yep. Now, what's really interesting is this guy right here. So this is the Photon. We've talked about the Photon a fair bit before. This is the 6SN7 version, 6H8C in translated Cyrillic, I believe. And we have some features of both tubes here. So we have these vertical T-plates. We have some mica spacers to help with microphonics. And I like to call this sort of the poor man's Bad Boy because it has a lot of similar sound qualities to something like the Sylvania Bad Boy.
Well, the construction's very similar. It's got a bottom foil plate. And one of the questions I get fairly often is, do the getters make a difference? Well, electrically, they're not in the circuit, of course. Mm-hmm. All they're there for, the gettering, that silver coating, is to help tighten up the vacuum when the tube's first manufactured and to maintain the vacuum over time.
Yeah, there it is right there.
But there's a possibility that actually a plate getter versus a top halo getter does make a difference. I don't have an answer to that. I'm not even guessing if there's an answer to that.
Well, some of it might be correlation. You know, they use the plate getters on the earlier tubes, and the earlier tubes tend to sound better, so that could be it right there. This guy right here is actually a 1960 dated one. And this is fairly early, although we do see some dated for the 50s. But all of these plate getter Photon 6SN7s sound great. The later NEVZ ones that have the saucer getters, avoid. They tend to be unreliable, noisy. They don't have anywhere close to the same sound qualities as these guys. But they look almost identical, so you have to be careful.
They truly sound meh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. It's just amazing how when they did a generational shift in manufacturing, what I have no idea what
Even though
did.
they look so close, they just sound very different.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I know earlier I said to help identify what your preamp tubes are, look for the high gain version, but a lot of preamplifier sections aren't worried about high gain. So if it's a phono stage, yes, it's going to need some high gain. If it's an integrated amp, it almost always the designers just give you a lot of gain on the input preamp stage. It just means that they can take pretty much any input you can give it, and they'll get it up to enough voltage that the power stage can work with it. But there are an awful lot of really good quality preamps that use lower gain, or what on the data sheets are called medium U or medium gain tubes, like the 6SN7 and the 12AU7. So if all you've got in your preamp are 12AUs or 6SNs, then
that's probably your gain tube. It could also be a driver tube too, but it's probably the gain.
And it could be a cathode follower tube.
Yeah.
But that's a subject for another day. So hopefully that helps get you a little bit better oriented in choosing your tube for your preamp or your preamp for your tube. And now Charles has got a bunch of tubes that came in that we should show off, I think.
Yeah, so let's clear the deck.
Okay, Charles, what came in this week?
All right, well, let's start over with this little guy. And this is one of the few other 12AX7s that we actually really get behind, but they're getting even rarer and harder to find than the Matsushitas. And these are the RFT made. So this is East German production. And these are the ECC 83s.
Which is just the European designation for the 12AX7.
And they have these very distinctive sort of rounded box plates with these holes and the single wing on the side. And they're a good sounding tube. I'd say they're a little bit more detailed than the Matsushitas.
Focus in on the label there. Just back it up a little bit.
There we go.
So this was actually rebranded by Siemens. In fact, Siemens, which was and is a really high quality electronics supplier and manufacturer in Germany and internationally, did a lot of rebranding of RFT tubes for the simple reason that they were just so well made and so cost effective. It didn't make any sense to manufacture them in Germany, in Western Germany.
Yeah, so you often see RFT tubes rebranded for just about everybody, but you see a lot of them rebranded for Siemens.
And of course, these are all vintage tubes, so they go back before the reunification of Germany, so before the wall came down.
Yeah, so we managed to find a small number of them, and we have a few pairs in the store of these guys here if you're interested.
And sonically, what's the difference between those and the Mullard-like Matsushitas?
I'd say a little bit more detail. They're about the same in terms of noise floor and microphonics. I'd say that these have a bit of extra something in the mid and top range compared to the Matsushitas.
Yeah, I mean, all of the RFTs have this different kind of a sound to them. Not in a bad way, just different.
Yeah, which is nice to have whenever you're trying to roll things in and looking for something that's really special.
Now, earlier we were talking about photons, and we just got in a fairly large lot of them, which is good because it's our best-selling 6SN7 by far. We must have sold thousands of them by now.
Yeah, and well, we're having trouble finding them still, but we are still getting some trickling in.
And in one of the lots that we brought in, we found a lot of 1950s versions.
Including one that is dated for 1951. So here it is right here. This is probably the earliest version of one of these tubes that we've actually got in our hands on. This was made in October of 1951. And
it's got an interesting defect that I would call cosmetic. It's not structural, it's not electrical. You see here, I don't know, they can see it. It's right on, I can just make it out. There's a scratch on the inside of the glass. And what happens is the mica, which is a natural rock, it can have fairly sharp edges. So when the tube's inserted, if it's a little snug, it actually scratches on both sides. And we see that quite often with the tung-sols as well. And of course, what that means is that the structure here is really well mounted inside the tube envelope. And that will help dampen down any vibrations in microphonics. It'll make for, I think, a lower noise or a cleaner sounding tube. I think that was the secret of the tung-sol mouse ears we were showing you earlier.
So this actually has some interesting differences to it that we've only just now noticed. If we compare it to something that was made in 1960, the tube we were looking at earlier, you can probably tell right away that these are actually a bit different. So we have these ribs on the plate of this guy, whereas this one has a smooth plate structure. Sorry about the glare there. And you can see on here we have these sort of cutouts in the mica. And you're thinking, well, what are these cutouts for? Well, On the earlier version of the tube, they actually had, let me get that in focus, they actually had metal straps that went through around those cutouts and held the plate structure onto them.
Yeah, and over the years, I guess they dispense with that.
On later versions of the same tube, you'll actually see that these cutouts are removed and you just have a straight mica. So I guess when they replaced the dies that were cutting the micas, somebody probably thought, why are we still doing this? So we probably actually have a small number of these very early photons in this latest batch that I'm still testing and clearing. And if we have enough to make some matched pairs up, I'm going to put them in the store separately and give them some more listening time and see if they sound any more different than their slightly later cousins here. That's really quite interesting.
Okay, well, thanks for doing that, Charles. And if you stay to the very end, here's some discount codes to help you out. Remember, we can reach almost everybody around the world with flat rate $20 shipping. But if your order is $150 or more after discount, the shipping's on us, folks. And talking about discounts, there are some Cheers codes you can grab, including a secret code that's pretty easy to figure out. That'll save you some big bucks. This is Jim.
And Charles.
Signing off. Cheers, everyone.